They say knowledge is power, but you need the wisdom to understand what this actually means. Welcome to the Decoding Health podcast. I am your host, Dr. Urban A. Kiernan. Each week, we will share the stage with renowned experts as we dismantle the black box of knowledge and unravel the complexities of science and its practical applications in our daily life. This show is committed to illuminating topics ranging from personal health and wellness to cutting-edge biopharmaceutical advancements and beyond. Let's get started. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Decoding Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Urban A. Kiernan, serial biotech entrepreneur, metabolic researcher, and your guide for the next hour. Extremely excited to be here with our very special guest. Before we jump into that introduction, make sure you guys like, subscribe, leave your comments, even the nasty ones. Love it. We just got kicked off of YouTube. We're on to Rumble now, and we are really looking forward to spicing things up today. So our guest today is a metabolic health wizard and a really, really good friend of mine. She is a native of South Africa, living here, and then into Canada. And check out her first episode because she is a return guest on this show. It lived up in Canada and now living in Midland, Texas, if you don't mind me disclosing where you're at. So if anybody here watches Landman, even though they say they're in Midland, Texas, they're not really shooting in Midland, Texas, because apparently Midland, Texas was too ugly for television. So I found that very interesting. But regardless, Michal, welcome to the Decoding Health podcast. Please take a moment, introduce yourself to our audience, please.
Urban, Dr. Urban, I should say. I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me back again. I'm even more excited that we're on Rumble because we get to actually delve a little deeper and get a little spicier into our conversation. Little bit about me. I was once upon a time an optometrist, went through some very big health crisis, which we don't need to get into. I think I went more into that in our first episode. Started studying functional nutrition from a functional medicine perspective. So I'm not a dietitian. Got in partnership with a functional medicine doctor, have been running functional medicine nutrition programs in her clinic for years, for almost 20 years now, have a private practice where I help people heal their metabolic health. And I was in the low-carb, keto-ish space long before it became popular, long before people even knew what it was, right? I was promoting eating meat and all of those things. People thought I was crazy for the longest time. But as my education has evolved and as my practice has evolved, my focus has really become on helping people improve their metabolic health. And you and I both have a penchant for this underlying root cause of illness called insulin resistance. And we're going to be delving into some of that today, which I'm so excited about, and really helping people deal with that as one of the major root causes of all the chronic illnesses that are plaguing us today. So I use natural food, lifestyle, targeted supplementation approach to help people prevent getting sick, help people heal from getting sick, and help people break loose from the shackles of, not your company, which is amazing, but of the big pharma companies that like to create customers for life. They have the best business model in the world, the best customers for life.
And just on that point, I want to kind of throw it out there because all of biopharma is kind of lumped into this four-letter word. And for the record, big pharma, their survival is predicated upon sales. There's no difference between a big pharma company and Amazon. They're there to sell you a product. Now, in the case of my company, Metabolic Biopharma, we are an innovator company. We discover, we get solutions to the point of industry level de-risking, but we have no intent of actually commercializing our product because the headache and the infrastructure required for that. Requires a totally different company. So again, I'm in the space. I know these people. For the most part, a lot of them are really, really good, passionate people. But to your point, Mikhail, from a business model standpoint, it's pretty incredible considering the system is set up the way the system is set up, in which, from a chronic indication, chronic disease standpoint, these individuals are locked into that system for life. Life. And so, with the whole concept of metabolic health, and this is going to be a very unique conversation because, you already said insulin resistance. And most people, when they talk about metabolic health, they're solely focused on glucose, on sugar. There's a fat component to this. That is, and I've talked about this so much before on this show regarding the tribalism in beliefs. And you used to be carnivore keto, and that's one of the most tribal groups
Yes.
that I've ever come across before in my entire life. The next one, actually, probably even higher than the carnivore keto people are the peptide people. Also, like in terms of like tribalism, we're right and everybody else is wrong.
And
But
don't forget the vegan people. Sorry to interrupt, but don't forget them.
oh no, absolutely. And I've had less interaction with the vegans that are out there. But long story short, like even the people who are passionate about in the fight of metabolic dysfunction, there is tribalism there too. And you've got people who are just lockstep on the glucose. And unfortunately, the lipid, the fat metabolism aspect is kind of like left off as a satellite on the side here, but it is equal, if not even potentially more important than the sugar aspect, because they're tied and nobody ever talks about this. So this is where, your discussion on this discussion here is going to be so enlightening and so engaging for our audience members, because people need to understand this, because when you only attack the problem from one side, you're not wrong, but you're not right either at the same token. And we need to get both halves of the whole in order for getting an appropriate solution for the patient. So with that said, I'm going to shut up here, Miguel, and we're going to talk about fat. And I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's talk about fat and how that interplays with insulin resistance.
Awesome. So thanks so much, Urban, and that was great. And I will say, your Urban's company is developing some and innovating some stuff right now, really near and dear to my heart, and I am a strong supporter of what you're doing. So please keep at it. All right. I like to start this conversation with two premises. Number one, people, you'll get the two camps. Calories are everything, and calories don't count, right? And a lot of what you spoke about in the camp space is divided into that. You'll hear a lot of people say, just eat as much fat as you want. It doesn't matter. Fat doesn't raise insulin. All of those kinds of things. And then there'll be people who say it doesn't matter if you eat carbs or fat. It's all about the calories. Cut your calories. And both are wrong and both are right. So the truth is somewhere in between. And I'll say that because I'm sure most of us now, unfortunately, know somebody, or at least one, probably way more, people who are struggling with type 2 diabetes. And some of them are really overweight. And we often think about type 2 diabetes as associated with significantly overweight people. But some of them aren't. And they'll look at you and they'll say, I don't understand. I don't understand why I got diabetes. I'm not fat. Right? And this is where the concept of personal fat threshold comes into play. And this affects many other things in our lives as well. But type 2 diabetes is probably one of the most common chronic illnesses that people have nowadays. So we're going to frame it in that context, but understand that even if you're struggling to lose weight, even if you're in that weight loss resistance category, this applies to you, right? Even if your cholesterol levels are imbalanced, this applies to you. But we'll discuss it in this context for now. So what the theory is, and I think it's one of the wonderful men that sits on your board who actually is part of the developers of this theory, Dr. Gerald Shulman. And when I first learned about this, it was before I even knew who he was. I learned about it from some mentors and teachers that I had many years ago. But delving into it, it made more and more sense. And what it's telling us is that we all have a threshold of fat that we can store. And fat is stored energy, right? Fat is the reserve tank in the back of your truck. And our reserve tank is only so big. Your fat cells grow, and they can only grow to a certain size. Some people can develop new fat cells as adults, but those will also, you can only proliferate, you can only make a certain amount more of them, and they will, again, only grow to a certain size. And the size of your fat and cells and the size of my fat cells are probably a little different. So fat is where we store our energy, and we consume energy in two forms. We consume it in the form of carbohydrate, and we consume it in the form of glucose, which turns into glucose, or we consume it in the form of fatty acid. Those are the two main forms they are the two main forms that we consume carbohydrate. If we are not using that we consume energy. If we are not using that energy, right, we've got to do something with it. And unlike protein, where the body really doesn't like playing around with protein and using protein for energy much, and it has a whole bunch of stopgaps in it. One of them being you'll get really full really fast, and anyone who's ever been to the Brazilian barbecue knows all about the meat sweats, right? Carbohydrates and fats, neither one of those have that. So we can consume and consume and consume, and our bellies can be really full, and we might not feel the best, but there's nothing in our brain that's telling us to stop consuming. So what happens is many of us, and especially in our modern food environment, eat more of them, both of them, than we need, often combined, which is even worse. So what does the body do with both of those extra energies? It stores them in the fat cells. So even if we reduce carbohydrates, and I know I'm taking a very long-winded approach here, and I'm sorry, but I'm really trying to focus on the calorie thing. Even if we don't consume carbohydrate and we're consuming fat from an energy perspective, an energy balance perspective, in greater amounts than we need, we are going to have a fat storage problem at some point. Now, the size of your fat cells is genetically determined, and we know if you look at populations that certain populations develop type 2 diabetes at a much smaller size than other populations, right? So, and there's this genetic component, and now there's a lot of we've mixed a lot of our genetics. Not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just that's what's happened. So everybody's fat threshold is quite different, and we might get some genetic components from one side of our family or another. But that component, that part is genetically determined. So what happens when the fat cells get too full? Well, when the fat cells get too full, think about a balloon that you're blowing up too much. Once it gets too full, we don't want it to pop. The body doesn't like that. But the air starts leaking out the front, and fat starts leaking out the front, or it starts leaking out and it spills over. And it generally tends to spill over into our bloodstream, our liver, our organs, our other organs, especially our pancreas and our muscles. And those are places that fat should not be. Fat should be either being used for energy in our bloodstream in certain amounts, or in fatty acids, like in a fatty acid. I can't think of the word. You know what I mean. As a fatty acid, or it's being stored in our fat cells. So it spills over into the we become marbled meat, we become Wagyu beef, which is great when you're eating a steak, not so great when it's in your arm muscle or your leg muscle. The liver becomes fatty, big problems. We know that things get blocked up. We have this, again, this condition now that has developed, it didn't exist before, called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Alcohol causes the liver to get fat because there's nowhere else for that to get stored. It's all metabolized and stored in the liver. And now we're getting all this extra liver fat from exogenous sources outside of the liver because there's spillover of our fat cells. And once the liver starts getting fat, then the pancreas starts getting fat. And a fatty liver is not good. But a fatty pancreas is so much worse. And so what the brilliant, most amazing thing about Dr. Schulman's work is he discovered that what this extra fat does to the cells of the liver and of the pancreas is it increases this compound called diacylglycerol. And this is, so it's DAG is what it's called. And this very specific compound, what it tends to do is it stops the signaling of insulin. So it's the fat that directly affects whether the cell is able to, whether the receptor on the cell is able to hear the call of insulin. So the cell isn't listening to the insulin in the liver. And this is a very, very dumbed down version of it to get it to you guys quickly. But the cell isn't listening to insulin. And so what happens then is the pancreas says, well, if the cell isn't listening to insulin, I need to make more insulin. And it does. Now, insulin and glucose are very, very carefully balanced by the liver. And so when the insulin levels and the glucose levels have to balance each other out, and when there isn't insulin, the liver is making glucose. And when there's too much glucose, the liver starts to make insulin. So what starts to go on is we're not listening to insulin. So the liver's ramping up glucose production. The liver will make glucose at that point. The pancreas is getting the signal from the liver that there's no insulin, so it's making insulin to deal with the glucose, which the liver isn't hearing. So you get this awful, awful downward spiral of insulin and glucose both going up. And long story short, finally, we develop type 2 diabetes, and with serious complications if this is allowed to continue. Because once the pancreas starts to get fatty and the pancreas starts to overwork, the risk of the beta cells of the pancreas not working or just working themselves to exhaustion, if you think about it, and they just kind of, give up, or the pancreas developing inflammation within itself because of extra fat. So you have the risk of requiring insulin, so where type 2 diabetes becomes an insulin-dependent problem, and the risk of the pancreas of developing pancreatitis, which is not something anybody wants to develop ever. So I hope that makes sense in a very, very shortened, semi-dumbed down version.
And for me, it does. For our audience members, I do want to throw
Yes.
some clarification in there. So
Yes,
first and
please.
foremost, we're talking about Dr. Gerald Schulman, Yale School of Medicine, former Howard Hughes medical investigator. He does sit as a scientific advisor on the board of Metabolic Biopharma. I'm just trying to be transparent with everybody here. I also want to give credit, though, also to Dr. Kit Falk Peterson. That's Jerry's wife and is also a colleague of his who's contributed equally to all of this research. And she's also sits on the medical advisory board for Metabolic Biopharma. So I just want to make sure that both of them and their contributions are treated equally. Now, it's interesting that you brought up the whole racial ethnic component, because me being of mixed race, this is something that I live with every single day of my life. And I saw this growing up, and I'm allowed to go and make these types of comments because I am half Asian. Okay, I'm allowed to say this.
You're not Rumble. It's okay. You can say whatever you want.
Well, so like everybody's familiar with BMI. Okay. And with BMI here in the United States, because those are all population based, if you hit around 26, then they start saying, "Oh, you're having an issue. You're starting to get overweight." However, with Asians, to be to be honest with you, that realistically starts at around 21. Okay, so you have these different scales that are not accounted for by Western medicine, okay, because Western medicine is all predicated upon population based studies, and that type of segregation or fidelity in the data, it just does not exist for practical medical practice. And again, I treat everything originally that's from with good intention, but now we're to the point where it's starting to backfire on us. And now back to your whole point in the formation of these DAGs, diacylglycerols, and this spillage of fat from your actual fat tissue, your adipose tissue. And the human body is absolutely incredible in the way it is supposed to work and wants to work. Um, However, though, it's most people don't realize this is by the time we end puberty, the majority of humans have the number of fat cells, unless they have something like liposuction, have the number of fat cells that they're going to die with. Realistically, that's it. All that happens is they change in size. But back to your analogy of the balloon, they have a finite capacity. Now, when people wind up reaching uh, either morbid obesity or the term super morbid obese, like I can't keep up with the new terminology that's coming out there. You do wind up in a situation in which the body is so stressed that it actually starts to make, it's called hyperplasia. You start making more fat cells. Now, I'm going to throw this out there because of those drugs, the GLP-1 receptor agonists that are out there, those actually result in what was promoted as fat remodeling. That's nothing more than a dumbed down term for hyperplasia. So when you go on those drugs for a extended period of time, you end up having more fat cells than what you started with. And so that just gives you more basically storage bin containers for when you do wind up getting fat to put more pounds on. And that comes back to that premise, which you guys hear me talk about this on the show all the time. When you go off those drugs, watch out. Okay. And so now we wind up in this situation in which you've got a finite capacity of fat storage, and then you wind up spilling over into, with these DAGs, into normal, healthy, functional cells. And, you can approach health from either a top down aspect. I look at you, Michal, as an organism, and it's like, okay, you got this health picture, and then we're going to go and work downwards all the way down to the cellular level. But the way nature works, it doesn't work that way. It starts with a bottom up, mechanism. And so it all comes down to the function of the cell. And I refer to this, and I got this term from Jerry and Kit. It's this concept of ectopic fat, like ectopic pregnancy, a pregnancy where it doesn't belong. It's fat where it doesn't belong. And you wind up getting cells storing fat and it doesn't belong there. And there are studies that have shown, like, even, and this kind of goes into the concept of why when somebody suffers from obesity, you get all of these metabolic conditions clustering in them. And you brought up non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and that has become so prevalent. They actually just changed the name of NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, to MAFLD, metabolically associated fatty liver disease, because that is the immensity of the problem. Just cutting to the chase right here, they're even finding individuals, because if you are obese, you have a higher propensity for developing cancer. And what they're finding is your T killer cells, when they are laden with fat, more specifically diacylglycerols, T killer cells can no longer kill. And therefore, you are a higher rate of susceptibility to development of these other diseases, in the particular case, cancer. So, this is something where you've got these systems that are all interplaying, but based upon your genetics, your level of fat threshold in which this process of ectopic fat, and you can't see this. You don't know this until your systems, again, it's because it's a bottom-up approach. You've got cells becoming dysfunctional, then the tissues, then the organs, and then the organism. And it isn't until that these hierarchies start to break down that most people realize that we've got an issue. And by that point in time, it's pretty significant. It's like back to the whole, you were talking about the significance of type 2 diabetes. Well, type 2 diabetes is what, 19% of the adult population right now, whereas if you look at pre-diabetes, which in my personal and professional opinion, pre-diabetes doesn't exist. You are type 2 diabetic. That's 50% of the population. So sorry for kind of like taking over there and bringing that in there. I really want our audience to understand the significance of what it is that you're introducing here, because these two systems do interplay, and in reality, you cannot have one without the other.
Absolutely, and thank you for clarifying that and adding even more detail. And it's all about exactly what you said: a type of cell in your body where it doesn't belong. And your body, right? And that's all it is that we are playing around with with one type of cell and causing it to release parts of itself into another type of cell, and they're incompatible. It's trying, it's just it doesn't work, and the downstream problems are ridiculous. Now, the interesting part to all of this is you'd gone through BMI, which is great, but one of the things that the research is very clear on is that even small amounts of weight loss, of fat loss, can really impact that ectopic fat quite dramatically. So it's not an entire doom and gloom situation. It is very much a controllable and to the most part, depending on how much damage you've done and how long you've let it go for, but for the most part, a reversible condition, which is very, very hopeful. The problem is, again, we have camps, we have dietary advice that is not supportive of this. We have population measurement data like the BMI, which doesn't help us with this either. So unless you come to it from a podcast like yours or from doing your own research, it becomes really difficult to identify it in yourself or to even think about it in yourself or in your loved ones so that you can actively do something about it. And the way that I came to it was from weight loss resistance, people who were on ketogenic diets and carnivore type diets, and they were like, oh, eat all the fat you want. Fat doesn't raise insulin. And the insulin model is great, but it's an oversimplification, and it doesn't take into consideration how the body works. So when I was seeing these people with on very, very low carbohydrate to zero carbohydrate diets, and they were struggling to lose weight, and they were still getting diabetes, right? So and pre-diabetes is diabetes. I agree with you there 100%, because the one is the other. What are you going to do if your doctor tells you you have pre-diabetes? Are you just going to wait around for diabetes to happen? And if you're diabetic, unless you want to be a customer for life, are you simply buying into the system? The solution for both is the same. But that being said, I was seeing all these people on these ridiculously low carbohydrate diets still getting the illnesses. And then I had the fortune or misfortune to work with a lot of vegan people or a lot of calorie counting people just through how I was treating functional medicine patients. And even with them, there was it didn't make sense. Some of them did really, really well on very high carbohydrate diets, and some did not. But a lot of them did really well because they were very, very calorie restricted diets. So, right, what gives? It's not all about the insulin model, and it's not all about the calorie model either. It's a both and situation. Am I repeating myself too much here?
No, you're doing great. Keep going. Roll with
Okay.
it.
So, so it's important to understand that one of the possible signs of weight loss resistance is this personal fat threshold. The problem that we have thrown into the mix, as you just said right now, is we have all these drugs on the market which make people lose a ton of something, but the number on the scale goes down, right? And it's muscle and it's fat, but at the same time, it encourages hyperplasia, as opposed to hypertrophy, which is where the cell grows. Hyperplasia, and we used to see this happen at times with other conditions like lipolysis. I mean, like liposuction, and like something called cool sculpting, which if anybody's ever looked at, at mechanical ways to lose fat, it's you freeze your fat cells off, and the fat cells are dead. They never come back, but you end up growing fat cells in other places. It's also one of the reasons that people who have undergone bariatric surgery lose a ton of size, and eventually, it's usually around the 2-year mark, a little later, things stop working, right? Because we are not smarter than nature, and we are not smart. We think we are, but we're not smarter than our bodies, and there'll always be that pushback. So we have this now thrown into the mix in a much greater degree, right? Cool sculpting or liposuction or bariatric surgery are not as common as the use of the GLP-1 agonists, and there's more and more and more of them coming out. And this, I believe, this is going to be a big problem in a few years' time, because people do not want to stay on the drugs for life. And the downstream consequences of that are going to be this metabolic disease cascade that's going on, even worse. And people are going to experience it at a much smaller size and a much lower BMI because of how these drugs, and this is just my theory, how these drugs are affecting the body. And one of the reasons is because you might look smaller, but you'll probably have more fat and less muscle mass because you've built so much more. You'll have more storage capacity in your smaller body because there'll be less other stuff taking up that room. Does that make sense?
Are you sick and tired of feeling sick and tired, want to reclaim your metabolic health, but you really don't have the time or the ability to eat as clean as you would like or spend hours in the gym? Well, here's a new biohack that I've implemented as a part of my life. Just by including these 2 products as a part of my daily routine, I am able to achieve my health and fitness goals by doing nothing. Protocol is all natural, it's simple, comes with a money-back guarantee. If this is something that is of interest to you, click on the link below and let's learn how to feel great together. Yeah, 100%. And for the record, this isn't theory. There was a study that was published it was a retrospective study. 131,000 patients were monitored, and people were on the drugs for a period of 2 years. And they cessated stop using the drug. And then by 18 months, they had removed, or they had undone every type of benefit that they had achieved in that 2-year period, or within that 2-year period on the drug. It was all removed within 18 months, and by year 2 or 3, all of these patients were worse off than when they had started. And again, I'm very libertarian in my beliefs. Go ahead and do what you want. I am not here to turn around and stop you, but at the same token too, I don't want to be the person like, I told you so. We're giving you the information. You decide for yourself. Now, there's a ton of these new drugs that are coming out there. They're being used with like anabolics. Please, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys are taking the advice of social media influencers, you really need to take that with a huge grain of salt. Like, I am Dr. Urban A. Kiernan. I am a PhD researcher. I've got patents in this space, in this area that Michal is talking about. This is the area I live in, and that gives me a tremendous amount of knowledge base and then freedom to discuss about this. But there's a lot of people who have the term doctor and they're chiropractors. And they're talking about all of this stuff. And there's, especially when it comes to the peptide space. That's why I said like the whole tribalism at the very beginning. Not a shot on chiropractors. I've got a couple of chiropractors that I go to that I absolutely love, but they stay in their lane. When you go to chiropractic school, I don't care if it's like, the Gonstein method, you went up to Palmer up in, up in Illinois, or, one of the schools down here in Arizona. You learn about subluxations, central nervous system, adjustments in order to treat subluxations for the treatment of disease. You guys did not learn about pharmacology. You did not learn about anything when it comes into the drug space because that's not your wheelhouse. And as much as everybody loves Grok and Claude and ChatGPT, those are not good sources of information for medical advice. Those things have other purposes, but you can't be turning around and taking all of this stuff, especially when they have a referral code down below. Go and check out my peptide store and see what you want to turn around and buy. But let's kind of get so you've set this huge foundation, Michal, regarding there's this level of personalized medicine that is required based around, you know, your individual needs and that threshold for fat, in which that level of body fat has this interplay for the dysregulation of dysregulate the loss of glycemic control. Your blood sugars are getting out of whack. And so now, as a part of this, from a Western society standpoint, I'm not necessarily like a finger to blame or point at, but where are you seeing like the causes driving these issues? Because this is a very, very spicy like even with the flip of the food pyramid, like I'm one of those individuals. I really don't get excited about the flip in the food pyramid because the practice of medicine still hasn't changed. There are these changes in terms of guidance, but okay, we're going to prioritize protein. Okay, that's fine, but we're still capping saturated fat at 10%. Okay, you can have it both ways. And okay, fine, you can go and use protein powders to supplement all of this. Well, I just did a short episode on maltodextrin and how that impacts your metabolism. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, go and look at your protein powder. Is maltodextrin in there in the list of ingredients for as an anti-caking agent? But that's a hidden carbohydrate in your protein powder, which has a glycemic index of like 0.85. And that will spike, which will turn around and spike your insulin, which starts this entire cascade of what you're just talking about. And you don't even realize it. So I got to shut up here because I'm talking way too much. Where are you seeing like the sinister aspect of this, or is it like bigger than what I'm even laying out here?
Well, fancy you should ask, right? It's bigger. It's huge, right? And the tentacles are long and they run deep. So I want to preface with something, just an interesting concept psychologically is the best way to stop someone from making a decision is bombard them with a ton of conflicting information or give them too many choices. So when it comes to diet and nutrition advice specifically, and lifestyle advice, and guys and gals out there who are watching this, no qualms about it. What we are discussing today is, although there is a genetic component to how soon it'll happen for you, this is a diet and a lifestyle problem. This is not something that you catch. This is not something that you inherit. This is not because you have a fat gene, thank you, Oprah. This is not because of anything like that. This is a diet and lifestyle issue. And yes, some people put on and lose weight a little quicker than others. My husband is one of those. He always says, he comes from large stock. He always says, I look at food and I'll gain 10 pounds, right? Whereas again, from your perspective, Urban, like your genetics, you might not put on weight as fast. Nevertheless, you develop the diseases earlier. So this is a diet and lifestyle issue. And when it comes to diet and lifestyle advice, and I believe this is on some level, somewhere, big food, big pharma, who are in bed with each other because a lot of the companies own each other, but it is a distinct marketing tactic to give people loads and loads of conflicting information so they don't do anything and just continue doing what they're doing. Coca-Cola is good for you. Coca-Cola is okay in a calorie restricted. It's just about the calories, and as long as you move your body, right? As long as you exercise, you're fine. Exercise doesn't really help you. Your abs are made in the kitchen. Right? We hear stuff like this all the time, right? Processed food isn't that bad for you. It's all about the calories. Processed food is terrible for you. It's killing you. Now, some of it is obvious, but some of it is a little more sinister. And I think there's an interesting conversation, maybe not today, to be had when the companies producing the product that cause the illness are the same parent companies that are producing the product to manage the symptoms of the illness. And the product itself creates a customer for life because they're quite addictive. And I'm sure you've been through that. And the solution to the problem that the product creates has to be used for life because you're not dealing with the creation of the problem. You're just managing the symptom of the problem. So for all the conspiracy theorists out there, that is mine. And I'm not saying that these people wake up and they go like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. How can I kill 1 million people today? But I think it's a business model, and it's a sales model, and it's a psychological model that is definitely coming to play. There is a reason that food companies hire food scientists. And just side note, when I was first deciding what to be, I actually thought about becoming a food scientist at some point because I had a friend whose sister was one, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I know many people who are food scientists, and they think they're doing the best work in the whole world. But they are being hired, right? They are being hired by companies to actually find the bliss point, what they call the bliss point. There is a term for it. That exact amount of sweet, salty, crunch, fatty in a food, texture in a food that's going to hijack your brain and make you want more of it. Now, so that drives the overeating, right? Remember I spoke about calories at the very beginning where I said there's times where we're full and we're eating. I also believe that the further a food is taken away from its whole and natural form, and this includes protein powder, and I'm not saying protein powder is the devil, but it's also not something you should be living on, right? The further a food is taken away from its natural form, the more it has the opportunity to hijack your digestive system and your reward system that comes from food. And now we have another layer on top of that, because even food in its whole form is being manipulated and being modified and being played around with. And there's the GMO conversation to be had, right? And there's also the general pesticide conversation to be had. There's the, what are they putting on our food? What are they putting in our food? How are they manipulating our food? I mean, the simplest one is, soy and wheat. Well, wheat is but soy is genetically modified, right? And a lot of people don't understand that. But what it's done is they have changed the genetic structure of the soybean so that when they spray a field, and by they I mean the farmers, but the product is sold by Bayer, when the field is sprayed with Roundup, everything else dies but the soy. So the soy has this product, this glyphosate product on it. Wheat is different. People think wheat is genetically modified. It's not. Wheat is highly, highly hybridized. Humans have been doing that, and we've been manipulating our food supply for centuries. We interbreed things, like we get certain different types of cows. Even look at your dogs at home. Your dogs are... Right, your dogs have been hybridized, right? They didn't look like that when they started. They were once upon a time a wolf. So we've been doing this. We've been doing this for years. Cows and bulls, and they mate them for specific things. Race horses, they do it with that thing. But wheat, and that's been done to wheat for certain purposes. But wheat is what they call desiccated before harvest, which means it's sprayed with Roundup, and so that it kills the wheat so that it's easier to harvest. Now, in both of those situations, right, number one, what has that genetic modification done to the ability of your body to break down that break down the soy molecules and to use them? What is that slightly different genetic code? How is that integrated in your body? And honestly, we don't know, right? People can tell you that it's fine, but we do not know, because all of the studies, they can't do studies in humans. That's unethical. And all of the large majority of the animal studies, I'm not going to say all, the large majority of the animal studies have been done by the companies producing the product. So there's a vested interest in there to prove your own hypothesis. And then there's a whole bunch of psychological biases that come into that. But so number one, you have that with the GMO organisms, and there's other products that are GMO'd in different ways. But then this chemical is staying on the product. What is that chemical doing to our body? That chemical kills things. It kills things. So what is that doing to the bacteria that live in your, I'm pointing at my belly, I don't know if you can see, but to all the bacteria that live in your mouth and on your skin and in your belly and everywhere else that are so important for things like your immune system, for things like your metabolism, for things like your reproductive ability and your hormonal balance, for things like communication with your brain so that your brain is functioning properly and the foods that you want and crave and desire, right? So there's all these different things that are literally, even if you're trying to eat healthy, whatever that might look like for you, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff in the food system that's hijacking you from the start and causing this dysregulation on that cellular level, which again will affect how your body deals with, assimilates, uses, and appropriates energy. Because if your cell isn't able to absorb and utilize, if the ATP production isn't working well with your mitochondria, what's happening to all of those calories, all of that energy that you're eating, even if it's a little bit, and even if it's from good sources, right? So how is that impacting our fat storage, our insulin sensitivity of our cells, our ectopic fat accumulation, right? And we know that as the body gets more and more and more inflamed, one of the things that happens is it becomes easier and easier for the body to create ectopic fat. It's just sometimes easier. The fat cells become full, insulin resistant, and we are creating ectopic fat like this. Right, your triglycerides are screaming through the roof, but hey, you're on a statin for your LDL, and that's fine, so everything's good to go. But your triglycerides are through the roof. You have fat in your blood, your pancreas is getting fatty, and a whole bunch of downstream effects. So even with the best of intentions, I think what's going on with our food supply is problematic. And it's easy for somebody to say, eat organic or eat grass-fed, grass-finished. Number one, the contaminants are so prolific right now that even the soil in your backyard is contaminated. Organic food doesn't mean no pesticides or no herbicides. It just means not the ones that different ones, right? It's like, and I often compare that to saying, well, if you're going to to the naturopath, and the naturopath's giving you some, or to the Chinese doctor, and he's giving you a bunch of herbs and tinctures and things, you can say, well, it's not medication, but a lot of them are as poisonous, if not more toxic than medications, and have way more brutal side effects. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe. Arsenic is natural. Just say it.
You read my mind right there. I was just about to say that.
Arsenic is natural. And so is H2S, sulfur gas, right? And all of these things can kill. Carbon dioxide, right? They can all kill you. I digress though. Lifestyle is a little easier to deal with because some of the lifestyle factors, because we are able, but we have to be quite disciplined to do it, but we are able to move our bodies. We are able to build muscle, right? And moving your body and building muscle are different things. Going for a walk is not the same as pushing out 100 push-ups with your child sitting on your back, right? Different things, but both important. It is possible, we don't want to, but it is possible to put your phone away for a little bit. It is possible to
come on. Your phone is so much fun, though.
to train yourself to not eat all the time. These things are possible, right? It's possible to darken your room and really, and I understand shift work, and I understand that not everything is possible for everybody, but it is possible to darken your room and go to bed at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, not stay up till 2 a.m. gaming. Right? It's possible. I'm not saying that you want to. I'm not saying that it's normal or common or, all of this dysregulated stuff has become so socially acceptable. Eating junk is socially acceptable, right? When you don't eat junk, people look at you like you're nuts. I don't drink, and I never have. And when I go out or to a party and people offer me a drink and I say, no, thanks, I say, sure. And I go, no, I don't drink. Right? Like, and I'm not saying alcohol is good or bad. It's not a judgment on alcohol. It's just something that's become so normal, so common that it's considered normal. And I'm the abnormal one, right? I'm abnormal if I say no to cake. I'm abnormal if at 10 o'clock at night, I'm like, okay, guys, well, actually everybody knows that I do this now, but okay, guys, I need to go to bed, right? I'm going home. And so we need to be okay with prioritizing ourselves and bucking the curve a little bit. And the people who support you will always support you. But anyway, so yes, so the big picture, lifestyle honestly is, in my opinion, a little easier to manipulate than food because we've got this dysregulated food supply. You can still work it out with your food. You can still do least possible damage, but understand that we are being hijacked with our food right now at every single turn. And when people go to Europe and they say, well, I felt so much better and I could eat all the things, it's because the laws of what they can put in their food there and on their food there is incredibly different to what happens here. And even between Canada and here, Canada isn't great. It's not great. But I felt it. I felt a huge difference between Canada and here. And I live in a small city, which is a great city, but it's not a large place where there's lots of food coming in, lots of import and export. It's very specialized and very localized, and sometimes it's tough. It's tough. So I'll stop there and see what you have to say there.
No, and those are all great points, and I want to kind of, the life. I agree with you regarding the lifestyle aspect. The problem is, though, that's a lot of work. And for a lot of people, that's hard, and so they neglect that until they get to the point where they have to do it. And now you're trying to climb Everest rather than just walking up a hill. And so that hardship, you kind of created it yourself. So I'm not scolding anybody by any stretch of the imagination. It is what it is. Now, when it comes to the food stuff, like, you gave this great explanation of glyphosate, but that's something that's been a part of our food process for 50 years now. Okay. And now there's all of those class action lawsuits. You can just go and Google search a class action lawsuits associated with Roundup. We now know what we know. The trap when all of this is you don't know what you don't know. And I'm going to give an example of how things have been modified, not genetically, but from a processing standpoint, because you went through this very nice explanation from an ectopic fat standpoint, and the establishment of these DAGs, these diacylglycerols, in your cells. And once those are in your cells, basically, like the way I always reference it here is everybody's got that niece or nephew that thinks your house is so cool. And they go around and they start flipping all the light switches. And now there's that one plug that's tied to that one switch where you don't know. And now that plug doesn't work. And now you have to go around and test every single switch to get that plug to turn back on. That's essentially what happens in your cells, and the whole phosphorylation cascade is once those DAGs are in there, those light switches are all changed and the cell is fundamentally confused. Now, I don't know why this hasn't been studied more. Obviously, Jerry and his team at Yale have studied this. I think Cedars-Sinai Hospital has actually done studies on diacylglycerols or diglycerides, depending upon which nomenclature you use. And those are actually metabolic disruptors as a part of your diet. And now, as a father, like, okay, we're going to go out for supper. What are you going to get your son? Let's get him a glass of milk. And you think it's protein, fat, you're doing the right thing. Has anybody looked at the labels of milk now or ice cream? They are adding mono and diacylglycerols to dairy products to help to help keep them creamy. That's the excuse that's in there. But you are ingesting something that there, we know, there's a good body of evidence that we know that you are adding this contaminant into your body, which will F you up. There's no way of explaining that. And we're now giving it to our children, and we don't know what we don't know. That stuff should not be in there. It should be a byproduct of basically incomplete combustion. That's what the way I turn around and do that is you've overwhelmed the system so bad that it starts producing DAGs. Now you are willingly ingested. Now this is even getting way worse, and this is where things get a little bit spicy here, with the whole new, hey, eat your fruits and vegetables. But now you've got to watch for that damn green label for the appeal coating on that. And it's not even a coating, it's an infusion. So I'm not going to say any names, but it was developed by this computer guy that I have very, very little respect for out there. The premise behind appeal is it is to improve the look of your fruits and vegetables and prolong shelf life. Okay, that's fine in premise. I get it. But the thing is, though, now you are taking things that are supposed to be wholesome and good. Everybody views it as wholesome and good. And now you are adding a metabolic disruptor to your broccoli. Okay, and so I want to kind of just throw that out there. And Michal, you as an expert, like, I want your opinion on this. Or Urban, you're batshit crazy. You've spent way too much stuff thinking about this stuff, but know the science. I see what's going out there. I've scratched my head. They do hide behind the FDA definition of grass, generally regarded as safe. But if you read the next line of that definition, in small quantities, we're now dealing with 1% here, 2% here, 1%. Next thing you know, like even with seed oils, if you look at something like cottonseed oil, that is almost 20% mono and diacylglycerols. Okay. So these things are everywhere. I want your opinion on this, Michal.
Okay, so I'm going to preface this with, yes, Urban, you're batshit crazy, but not about this.
Thank you.
It's because I have the utmost of respect for you. Urban is one of my most favorite people. So I touched on this a little earlier when I said it affects how the cell is able to produce energy, number one. And number two, and how the body is able to break down, assimilate, right, and utilize and appropriate this energy. And when the energy is in a form or is attached to a form that is harmful to the body or is not positive to the body is going to do its best in its own capacity, right, to deal with whatever it is that's coming in and get rid of it fast. Now, when it's a little bit, it's not a problem. I always tell people the body is great at dealing with a huge amount of stress in a teeny tiny amount of time. So, big example, if a car falls on somebody and you see this tiny little person like me run up to the car and pick up the car and the person can slide out from underneath. How can I pick up a car? Well, I can create and deal with a huge amount of stress. I can deal with that muscular stress in a small amount of time. Probably take me a week to recover. I might have pulled a muscle, right? But I could never lift the car every single day or an hour later again. That's not how it works, right? If your blood sugar spikes up once in a blue moon, who cares? Your body's able, like, oh my goodness, it'll say, alarm, 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 let's fix this. If you're hit by a bacteria, for the most part, right, your immune system can go nuts. But what happens when, number one, we're hit constantly and consistently and cumulatively? So we're getting these DAGs, right, all the time from everywhere, right? It's in your butter. It's in all the foods that are great for you. It's in your milk, right? It's in, depending if you're a Ray Peter, it's in your ice cream and you're eating it every day, right? They're adding it to things to stabilize them. Cottonseed oil, again, one of those things that's in everything, as you've said. So a little bit, your body could probably deal with it okay. It's not, it's not like arsenic where a little bit will kill you. A little bit you can probably deal with. And the seed oil debate becomes interesting with this as well. But again, another day's conversation. But then it starts to get on everything and the body becomes overwhelmed. And what am I going to do with this stuff? What am I going to do? Where is the safest place for me to shove any of this? In a nice little insulated fat cell, right? We know fat is a great insulator. If you've ever made pate, you put a layer of fat on the top to keep it nice and fresh, right? Same concept. So these DAGs so many of them, we don't know what to do with them. They get shoved into the cells, and we know, this is the part we know, they cause the cell to behave in a metabolically deranged way. They create insulin resistance in the cell. So even if it ends up in any other cell, and we don't know if it's ending up in other cells, right? It's a problem. And right, so if we don't know what cells it's in, we don't know what's going on with those cells. Yes, we know about the insulin resistance, but what about mitochondrial dysfunction, right? That's probably a little worse than insulin resistance because your cell stops working, and that becomes more problematic. Now, things like a peel, right? One of the things that product does, and I see it here a lot, because people have become, yes, this is a bit of a dig. People have become very lazy. You see peeled clementines and cut apples for sale at the grocery store. peeled clementines for sale. Not even broken up into the individual things. Peeled clementines. But anyway, that always blows my mind. But the apples don't go brown. The clementines don't go bad. Even if you bought like a simple iceberg lettuce, right? They don't go bad. Well, the bacteria aren't even eating this stuff. Bacteria. That's what going bad is bacteria eating the stuff. We've known this about white bread forever, that you could leave Wonder Bread on the counter forever and a day before mold starts to grow on it, right? And so what it's doing is it's improving. Yes, it's making the food shiny and pretty, and we've been taught that shiny, pretty food is what we should be eating, right? Everything needs to be shiny and pretty and perfect. That small little apple with the little dent in it, no. But not only everything shiny and pretty, but it's lasting a long time, which means bacteria aren't eating it. So if bacteria aren't eating it, and you're eating this food, which for the most part is to feed your gut bacteria, right? At the end of the day, there's the fibers and the stuff that we're not digesting ourselves or assimilating ourselves that to feed our gut bacteria, but bacteria don't eat the stuff. So is it killing the bacteria? Do we know? Have they studied it? Number one. Number two, what other digestive issues is that causing in your colon when the bacteria can't eat it, and then it starts to affect your motility? And these are just things that come up. It starts to affect how your body produces and eliminates waste. Is your body spending too much time trying to eliminate this as waste, so it's not eliminating the excess estrogens or the excess other toxins that are floating around in your blood that are supposed to be eliminated in your poop every single day, right? So that would be my perspective. Is we don't know. So we know that things that we know is that when your body doesn't know what to do with something, or when it's overwhelmed with something, it's very easy for the body to just shove it in your fat cells where it's nice and insulated with I'll deal with it later mentality, right? It's like that bottom drawer in your chest of drawers where you put all your receipts and things, and then tax season comes along and you look at it and you're like, ugh, right? But that's what your fat cells become. And we never have the opportunity to go back and say, okay, how do we clean this out? Right? Tax season never really comes. Or it gets to a point where the cell becomes so dysregulated or so imbalanced that we can't repair it anymore. And again, we don't know. So how is our food supply impacting our metabolic functioning, especially when it comes to fat storage and fat metabolism? And then back to this insulin. When we know that insulin is one of our primary dominant hormones, so if it's affecting how insulin signaling is happening, or how the cells are listening to insulin, or how insulin is being produced, we're creating big problems, even with the best intentions of giving your kid, some milk, which for a growing child, not low fat chocolate milk. If you're giving them some good, wholesome milk, but even milk, right? We know it's been homogenized, so it doesn't separate. It doesn't separate anymore. And then they've changed the fat content and the fat type that they feed cows, so that that it's cheaper to feed them, and they produce different quality, different type of fat that's easier to separate and easier to remove. So and again, how is that affecting us? How is more palmitate in the cow diet affecting the end product of the milk because a dairy cow a cow doesn't make butter or milk or cheese. The dairy cows tend to make the dairy cows, tend to make the dairy. What is that doing? How is that behaving? Just like the cottonseed oil.
Yeah, and again, that just comes back down to that central premise. We don't know what we don't know. You need to start asking questions, and you need to start paying attention, because food, again, I'm 52 years old, food that I used to consume as a child is not the same that I'm feeding my children or my grandchildren. It's just it's fundamentally different, and you can't operate off of a base assumption that milk is good for you. It depends which milk, and then, we can even get into, like, food sensitivities, delayed food allergies, and the whole 9 yards, which is a totally different conversation. But regardless, in the interest of time, Michal, I've thoroughly enjoyed, this conversation, but, for our audience members, hopefully you guys get jobs and everything like that you need to get to. If somebody has questions and they're like, man, this Michal, she really knows her stuff, where can people turn around and find you, Michal?
Oh, thanks so much, Evan. So the two easiest places to find me are either to contact me through my website, which is michalofer.com, MichaloFer.com, just my name, and my name will be in the notes, so easy enough. Or through my Facebook page, because I'm old. I'm older than you, Urban. And I started Facebook when Facebook first started, and that's just where I've kind of hung out a little bit. And I have a page where I post articles and like my own written articles and information every single day. And if you look up my name on Facebook, you will find me there. We can become friends if you want. You can ask me questions. You can interact with my content. I have a lot of free stuff. I have a lot of downloads and guides that you can request and ask for. So those are the best places. If you wanted to contact me directly, either DM me, private message me. I'm on Instagram as well. My last name, my first name, Ofer Michal, and I'm on Twitter as my name, but Facebook tends to be my home, or use the contact form through my website, because I always respond to emails as well.
And all of those links are provided down below. It's just, I just want to make sure that people can be in the know. So, Michal, thank you so very much for sharing your time, knowledge, experience. You mentioned that I'm one of your most favorite people, and that feeling is mutual. I love chit chatting with you. I'm glad that we get to actually come to, from the time of this shooting, we get to hang out next week a little bit in person and stuff. So really looking forward to seeing you in person again. And I always appreciate your thoughts and interpretation of the data, because I need to make sure that I'm not getting caught up in a camp or a siloed, thought process. And so again, you and I chit chat all the time, love hearing your opinion on stuff. Thank you so very much for sharing the personal fat reserve threshold. And I guarantee it, ladies and gentlemen, there's going to be more coming on this type of topic. Even Michal, again, she'll be on the show again. I guarantee it. So with that said, thank you, Michal. Really love having you on here. Ladies and gentlemen, if you guys have any comments, questions, drop them down below. We have touched on these topics in a variety of different capacities on the Decoding Health. Please, by all means, go and kind of search through the library and get all of these tidbits of information out there, because it becomes a very, very compelling story, so that you move from what you don't know what you don't know into, now I know, and I can make the best decisions for me and my family. And that's all that I want from my audience out there. So leave your comments. Make sure you guys like, share, the whole 9 yards. Reach out to Michal if you guys have questions, and we will catch you guys on the other side. Thank you very much.